Hi everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Amanda Ostrander. I am a teacher-turned-homeschool mom, and this is Raising A to Z, a place where we talk about all things homeschooling. And today, I'm going to explain what the difference is between government curriculum and homeschooling curriculum, because they're not the same. So I was planning on doing this video because I see it come up a lot. People are very confused about curriculum and government curriculum, and does this curriculum cover this? The word curriculum in general, people are very confused by. And so I had this planned, this was in the docket for this week, but then it came up that I've explained this question in person to at least 2 different people this week, and I think 1 last week. So I've had 3 people in my own homeschooling circles who didn't get it, and I figured, well, it's very apropos that that's what we're going to talk about this week. Homeschooling curriculum versus government curriculum. What are they? What's the difference? Why? How come there's so much confusion? The biggest cause of confusion is that when we're talking about the word curriculum, homeschoolers and government and teachers use the word differently. And even though it technically means the same thing in the end, the way in which they use it differs. And so that's where a lot of this confusion comes out of, because when you're talking curriculum with a homeschooler, you're talking about something very different than when you're talking about curriculum with a teacher or a principal or someone who is more in the governmental Ministry of Education side of teaching. So while we're using the same word, and technically at the far end, at the back of the definition where it has the same definition, both groups are using it differently, and the front end of the definition is different. Does that make sense? Probably not, but let me explain. When we're talking about government curriculum, I'm going to be specific with Ontario curriculum. This also applies very much so with most of Canada, and it probably does apply in other places as well. But when I'm talking about curriculum in government curriculum, I'm specifically talking about Ontario curriculum because that is what I am well versed in. That is what I was trained to read as a teacher, is Ontario provincial curriculum. That's what we're going to talk about. And it's very similar across Canada. And across Canada, they're going to use the same kind of definition, although each province might have slightly different expectations, but it's very, very similar across the boards. When government, teachers, principals are talking about curriculum, they're talking about a specific government issued document. This document is put out by the Ministry of Education, and it is essentially a very confusing, edu-speak filled, teacher, you need to be trained to understand document that is basically, if you really wanted to simplify it, a very confusing checklist. That's what it is. So there's a document for every subject: language, math, social studies, arts, science. There's French as a second language, French as a main language. There is a document for each subject. And essentially each document will tell you what are the expectations that you're going to basically check off by the end of the year. So, for example, if you were to go into the math document for grade 1, keep it real simple. Math is broken down into 5 sections. You have geometry, number sense, probability, data management, and there's another one. Anyway, there's 5. And under each section, it's going to have what students need to be able to do by the end of the school year. So it'll say things like, students must be able to add and subtract single digit problems. 1 + 1 is 2, 2 - 1 is 1. Students need to be able to count to 100. Students need to be able to do this. Students need to be able to do that. And it'll have those broken down into the different strands, because in the Ontario report card system, teachers need to teach so many strands per reporting term. That's why it's broken down. So you can't just sit here and teach all of number sense in one term and not do anything else. You have to cover different things throughout the year. But basically that's what it is. It is a checklist that by the end of the school year in math, in grade 1, in this strand of numeracy, children must be able to do boom, 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 boom. If they can do all of that, every single thing on that page, they are 100% A++. That is the expectation. That is what the government considers curriculum. That is what teachers consider curriculum. It is a checklist that by the end of the year, kids will be able to do X, Y, and Z. The teacher's curriculum does not tell them how to teach it. It does not tell them what text to use, what tests to use, what projects to assign, nothing like that. It is basically, here's a checklist, and it is up to the teacher to figure out how they're going to get all their students to learn everything that is on that checklist. Now, you might have a board, like a school board, that says, we're going to use such and such text to help you do that. So for example, I know a lot of, like locally, I know a lot of our school boards use Nelson Math, which is a textbook. And the reason why school boards will do that, it's not because it's required by the government. It's not because of anything like that. It gives some uniformity to the entire board so that all the kids in grade 1 across the board, across this entire area, are using the same textbook for grade 1, for grade 2, grade 3. And it just makes it easier for children who are moving. So if you're just like moving from one side of town to the other, you're still using the same textbook within a city. It makes it simple like that. It also makes it much easier on their resources because they can just buy, let's say, 2,000 grade 2 textbooks, and then teachers will get however many they need for their class that year. So if one class needed 25 this year, and then the next year they need 32, and this class had a few extra, then they can just swap resources that way. So you will see that some boards do have programs or textbooks that are uniform, but that's why. It's more of a money saving thing and like a uniformity thing to make it easier for kids who are moving in the area than actually like a requirement. And all of those textbooks cover, because those textbooks are written to cover what is in the curriculum. So it's just easy for them, right? But there is still a lot of leeway for teachers to make, and a lot of discretion for teachers to decide what they're going to do. So when they have their textbooks, they can pick what pages they're going to do. They can pick what tests they're going to do, what questions they're going to assign. They can add projects. They can take projects out. So it's really up to the teacher to decide how they're going to hit all of those checklists. You can also, for example, sometimes you're going to have some things that are stated as like, this must be the topic. For example, science program will say, here are your 4 units that you're going to cover in science this year. Yes, they cover 4 units a year in science. And so it'll say, okay, this year you're doing habitats and you're doing natural resources and flight and electricity. Those might be your 4 topics that you're covering. Some curriculums don't really have specific topics. When it comes to government curriculum, it's a lot more broad. So for example, in social studies, you will have kind of more broad topics. So for example, one of the, I think it's grade 4 expectations is that you will study a pre-1700s civilization. That's your like history component, is to study any civilization pre-1700s. That's why sometimes you'll see this grade 4 class, they did ancient Egypt, and this one did Vikings. Technically, they're both pre-1700s. So it fits. That is what they can do. And the teacher is just picking topics either A, they feel very comfortable with, or B, they think are going to be the best hook for their students. So for example, if you have a class that's like super into dragons, medieval Britain might be a great option for you, because you could totally get into like the knights and the folklore and all that. Like that's a total great option for that class. You might have a group of kids who are like, that's really not a thing we're interested in. They pick a different topic. So that's what the government and that's what teachers are looking at when they're talking about curriculum. They're talking about a document that is sent out from the ministry that they must follow, that is essentially a checklist, and that they have to cover, the teacher has to cover all the things in that checklist. How much a child retains off of that checklist is essentially what their grade is. So if a child gets 90% of all the checks, essentially, then you could say that they have like an A, they have a 90 in that class. If a student only gets like 70% of it, that would be like a B minus. So based off of that, that's everything they need to know, how much they're able to do and at what like proficiency they're able to do it, with what they use to determine whether it's a letter grade, a number grade, or a level. Ontario is really big with the levels here. So level 1, 2, 3, or 4. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about government Ministry of Education curriculum. It's basically a fancy checklist. And here's the important part. It is a fancy checklist that tells us what a teacher needs to cover by the very end of the school year. So this is what kids need to know in September or December or January. It's what they need to know before school lets out in June. They need to cover all of these things. Homeschoolers use the word curriculum differently. Homeschoolers use the word curriculum to describe a program, a workbook, or something similar that they are going to use to teach their kids a certain grade. When homeschoolers are talking about curriculum, they're talking about a book that they can basically pull out, and by the time their child has completed that entire book, they will have learned everything that they need to know for that grade. You see, by the end of the book, they've learned everything they need to know for that grade in that subject. That is how we're using the word when we're talking about curriculum as homeschoolers. How this compares to like government curriculum is typically at the beginning of your book when you're looking at like your table of contents. That would be kind of where you're looking at all the things that are going to be covered in that year. That is like your scope and your span and your scope of what's being covered. And that is basically telling you what is going to be covered all year round. By the end of the year, this is what they're going to know. And the big difference between like government curriculum and homeschooling curriculum is that homeschooling curriculum is telling you how to teach those things. It's telling you what to teach and why we're teaching it. That is where homeschooling curriculum differs. The homeschool curriculum is going to have things like, here's a project you should do. Here's an activity to do with your children. Here is the questions you need to answer. Here are the quizzes that you should take. Now, you as a parent can decide whether you're not going to do them. They want to cover as much as they can, but also give your child as many opportunities to practice the skills as possible. So they're giving you lots of options. You can skip something if your kids are totally getting it and it's just a waste of your time, or you can spend a little bit more time and do every single thing that's in your curriculum. That's totally up to you. But that's the plan. That's the idea behind homeschooling curriculum, is that it is telling you not only what to teach, but how to teach it. Another thing that you'll find with homeschool curriculum is that it tends to be more approach specific. So you will find things like Charlotte Mason curriculum. You will find classical curriculum, Waldorf curriculum. And essentially what this is that it's curriculum that is not only figuring out like covering what's being covered, but it's teaching it in a way that aligns with the philosophy of education of those different approaches. So sometimes you'll see parents who are like, hey, we like this, it's not working for us because it's just not aligning with our philosophies, or it's just this philosophy doesn't work for our family. That's when you're seeing a lot of families switch programs, is because they were using something that didn't match their philosophy, or if they have a child that, you had one who was very much one philosophy and one that wasn't. Sometimes you'll see parents like, hey, this worked for us, but it's not working anymore. They're just changing philosophies or changing approaches of how they're going to work with this child. And that's going to influence their curriculum choices. So that's why we have some confusion, because we're using the same words to explain essentially the same thing, that by the end of the year, this is what kids will have learned. Government curriculum has this checklist. Homeschool curriculum has kind of the table of contents, and by the time you're done it, this is what you have learned. That's how we're using kind of like the definition on the back end, but on the front end, we're doing it differently in that government curriculum is saying, this is the checklist, you need to cover all of this. And the homeschooling curriculum is saying, this is how we're going to teach everything we want to teach this year. That's where we're seeing that difference and that confusion. While I do acknowledge that it is confusing, you don't really need to be afraid of curriculum. You don't need to be afraid of government curriculum. There are some great resources. I'll put one down below where they've basically parentified. I don't know if that's a word we're going to use, but they've taken the curriculum and they've basically simplified it down to literally a checklist for parents that you can go like, check, 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 check. If you wanted to match curriculum from the government curriculum right over to your homeschooling curriculum, you can do that. Some parents really want their curriculum to align perfectly or very, very close to government curriculum. But in our province, in Ontario, you are not required to do that. And that's okay. You can sometimes, even from province to province, there's going to be little differences. One province might have kids doing, adding with carrying in one grade, and another one might not start adding with carrying until the next grade. You're going to have little minute differences. They're very similar, but you're going to have little differences from here to here, from place to place. And that's why you don't need to follow the Ontario curriculum to the T, because chances are you're probably covering, if you're using a decent math program, you're probably covering everything almost the same anyway, with a few variations. Same thing with language arts. If you're reading a variety of texts, writing a variety of texts, studying different media sources, and doing different types of writing, then you're probably going to be covering almost all the same things as the government curriculum anyway. It is a little confusing. I hope I've cleared it up for you. Once you understand that they are different but similar, it does make it a little bit easier for you when you're going forward with looking for what you want. And if matching with the public school system is important for you, then definitely take a look at the Ontario curriculum or the curriculum for your province. It's easy, it's free, it's online. Just type in Ontario curriculum and it pops up. And I'll also add the checklist at the bottom for it's specific to Ontario. I do believe there are other ones that they have for different provinces, but it gives you a basic run through of what's expected. But like I said, as a homeschooler, you have the ability to choose what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach, especially here in Ontario. And so sometimes we get to take some liberties. So for example, in my house, we don't follow the science curriculum at all. And I just pick sciencey type topics that my kids are interested in. So sometimes we're doing things that are similar. Like last year we did habitats, which technically matched Alexi's grade level, but I also did it with Zoe, so it wasn't matching her grade level. And then sometimes we're doing things that are like totally out to left field, but diving in really deep. And we're okay with that because sometimes they're very topical and just topics that seem to be put into the curriculum just to give a variety of options and ideas. So I hope this clears up some of the confusion. I do understand it's confusing, especially if you're not a teacher. It can be very overwhelming to look at government curriculum and be like, what does this even mean? But like I said, it's basically a really, really fancy checklist. And once you understand that, it makes a little bit more sense and it's a little bit more digestible. Homeschooling curriculum is great. I highly recommend it, especially a math or language program, because it's going to help you cover all of the basics and make sure that your kids are able to do things like read and write and do math. And once you can read and write and do math, you can learn anything. If you have any questions, comments, anything like that, leave a comment down below. Make sure that you're following along on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok so that I can help answer any questions there and you can see how I use my homeschool curriculum. And if you want more information, bonus videos, coupon codes, how I use unit studies in my homeschooling, those are all great options that you can do. Definitely become a member here on YouTube and you get all those extra cool bonuses. So thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.